I think I said in second reading that even the architecture of this chamber is a link back to the old House of Lords, that it was in the minds of Pugin and Barry to recreate the idea of a throne room, of a monarch taking counsel of his bishops and barons. And there is, I think, a thread in the makeup of this house that connects us back certainly to the earliest House of Lords in the reign of Edward III, I think probably to the Magnum Concilium of which the Earl of Devon spoke, or before that even to the pre-conquest Wittans. I think a Saxon king taking counsel of his thanes and ealdormen would have been doing something not unrecognisable to a chamber that contains a partly hereditary element. Now that thread is being snapped. That link is being sundered. It's being sheared in two, as the Fates were said to do with the thread of a man's life. And we're being cut off from a part of our history and our constitutional inheritance. Now, I'm Tory enough to regret that, but I'm Whig enough to recognise that there is something irrational about having an inherited element of a legislature. I do wish we were replacing it with something better, as was originally the deal promised in 1998, but we've lost that argument, and that's an argument for a different time. But I do come back to the bizarre anomaly of having a House of Lords that doesn't contain any lords, as the word would have been understood for the previous 1,000 years. That really does seem to me a case of having our cake and eating it. If there are no lords of the traditional, recognised aristocratic variety, then by what virtue, on what basis, do we continue to appropriate the name? Now, this actually is a question that has been faced before. During the Cromwellian interregnum, the Lord Protector was always trying to bring the old aristocracy back into government. He wanted to sustain the legitimacy of his rule by returning to bicameralism. But his problem was that none of the lords would agree to serve. Actually, I think, if memory serves, there was one, the sixth Baron Ure, who was a parliamentary soldier who inherited his title when the fifth Baron Ure, who was a distant cousin of his, who was a royalist soldier, was killed on the battlefield at Marston Moor. But he was the only lord in the old sense to serve in what came to be known with spectacular banality as the other house, and hence the conventions that we have to this day of how the two chambers refer one to another. Now, if you don't have any lords in the Cromwellian sense, don't you face exactly the same dilemma? We can probably do better than the other house as a title. We can call ourselves a senate or whatever. But it does seem to me utterly extraordinary that we should pretend to the authority and legitimacy that comes from this very old institution when we have deliberately, and by the way, in contravention of promises made at the ballot box, when we have deliberately torn that thread in two. And so I really would like an answer to this when ministers come to respond. Please, let's hear your defence of titles.